Dan Hannan, welcome.
Thank you.
Yes, I was just saying to the audience, Cameron is on tour in Europe, or was on tour in Europe, and he looked Angela Merkel in the eyes, and there was a spark. Were you surprised?
I think they get on very well, and I think she will have been pleasantly surprised by how limited his requests are. I think there is an element of almost disbelief among some of the more federalist leaders in Europe who had been expecting a much tougher set of demands from the British Prime Minister.
Well, you say that, but Angela Merkel said quite something. Changing the Lisbon Treaty is no longer impossible. That's not a small step, is it?
Maybe she means changing it back to the European Constitution, which you rejected exactly 10 years ago. We're celebrating the anniversary now. That's the kind of minor change she would be happy with. Look, we're talking here about minor technical changes to do with benefits that can be claimed by overseas nationals, to do with the wording on ever closer union, to do with the role of non-Eurozone states. I think what most of my constituents are interested in, whatever party they vote for, is a completely different kind of relationship, one where we can be in a free market, cooperating and trading with our friends and allies in Europe, but living under our own laws. And I don't think it's only British people who feel this way. Whenever there is a referendum anywhere in Europe, people vote against closer integration, and yet the process carries on.
Yes, so what you're saying is, whatever happens, the final word is for Westminster.
Well, the final word, I'm glad to say, will be with the British people. It's not me that David Cameron needs to convince, it's the electorate. But what we would like to see is a situation where we can live under our own laws and where the democratic will is respected.
And you're saying that that isn't what Cameron is demanding?
I think he has begun with a list, not on the basis of what relationship would we ideally want, but rather what can he be certain of getting so that when he comes back, he can portray it as a victory.
Yeah. So what should Cameron, at the very least, bring home to satisfy you and other people in his party who are your
I think we would want to have the supremacy of national parliaments over EU law, so that we can hire and fire the people who pass our laws instead of having it done by Eurocrats who nobody votes for.
Angela Merkel says no.
She does.
To that.
Yeah. Well, but here's the thing, okay? Tomorrow is exactly 10 years since the Netherlands voted no to the European Constitution. And all over Europe, people were cheering, right? There were glasses of Heineken being raised in every European capital because we felt that you had cast votes on behalf of 500 million unconsulted Europeans. 10 years on to the day, what's happened? Every single measure proposed by that constitution has been implemented anyway. The President of Europe, the Foreign Minister, the army of diplomats, the scrapping of national vetoes, legal personality for the EU, treaty-making powers, everything.
Yeah.
So the will of the Dutch people, like the will of the French people, the Irish people, was just brushed to one side. That's the basic problem. And saying this does not make me anti-Europe, it makes me pro-democracy. You can't have a basis of elites going ahead without public support and call that Europe.
But about public support, this is what you mentioned. How large is this public support? I mean, UKIP, only one seat in Parliament.
Sure, but I think a majority of Conservatives, and as far as I can see, a majority of Labour voters, if my emails, my constituency surgeries or anything to go by, want a different kind of relationship with Europe.
Yes,
it's not just UKIP.
But let's be honest, Mr. Hannan, the Eurosceptical parties didn't do that well.
But there's a difference, of course. UKIP had a particular set of policies to do with immigration and so on, which had a measure of appeal. They got 12–13% of the vote, but of course they didn't have the majority. But it's clear that people voted Conservative in some cases because we were offering a chance to vote on leaving the European Union. Now, I don't know which way that vote is going to go, right? The great thing about referendums is they remind politicians that we work for everybody else.
Right.
But at least people will get to decide on an issue of this magnitude. Should we live in an independent country or should we be part of a bigger country called Europe? That vote will be taken by the people as a whole.
I believe it was Churchill who said, we are with Europe, not of it. Maybe the Brits will go a step further and say we don't belong to Europe, we are leaving the European Union. The word is out. The exact phrasing of the referendum,
Yes.
of the question is, should the United Kingdom remain a member of the European Union?
Right.
Is it the right question?
Yeah, I mean, that's a perfectly fair question. I'm not going to, it's maybe not exactly what I would have designed, but I'm happy with
What
that.
would your answer be now
Now,
to that question?
today, I would vote to leave and rejoin the wider world. I think we are a global country with wider horizons than just Europe. Every continent on the planet is experiencing economic growth except Europe. Right? We could be doing mine. I have to say, when I come to the Netherlands, I spot something that makes me feel at home, which is that all of your most important buildings, like ours, face out to the sea. And you are, as we are, a maritime people, exploring people, merchant people, trading people. How is it that we have ended up in the only customs union on the planet that is experiencing zero economic growth?
Because it's profitable.
Well, is it really? I mean, look at the growth rates in China, in India, in Australia. Why can we not, and you not, be signing bilateral free trade agreements with these growing markets because, Italian textile workers don't want the competition or French filmmakers want protectionism? Why are we bound by a political and protectionist bloc when we are by inclination Atlanticist free trading people?
There has not been a referendum lately, but I don't think there's a majority in the Netherlands for leaving the EU. And I think it might have to do with the uncertainties it goes with.
Sure.
Because what will happen?
Yes.
Let's be honest, there have been many investigations
Right.
about how damaging that could be, about a loss of economic growth and so on. But let's be honest, we don't know, do we?
I mean, this is the only card that the pro-EU people are playing, fear of uncertainty, because people are change averse. A lot of people are, in that sense, naturally conservative. They are easily frightened. But I think the short answer when people say, what is the alternative if we were outside the EU, is to look at the countries that are in that situation now. Almost every country in Europe, whether or not it's in the EU, is in the European single market. Okay? Norway, Andorra, the Channel Islands, Switzerland, Serbia, Macedonia, Turkey. So we can look at some of the countries that are, in fact, the only European countries that are not in the European market, the only ones on the whole continent are Belarus and Russia. Okay? So if we were not in the political institutions, I don't think anyone is seriously proposing that we would not be in a common market with free movement of goods and services and capital. I think that is assured. But we would have huge advantages. So Switzerland has signed a free trade agreement with China. We can't do that. You can't do that. No. Switzerland is negotiating a free trade agreement with India. The EU has said it's not talking about.
But Switzerland is very specific.
And every country is specific.
Norway has oil. I mean, I think it's very hard to compare them all and to be reasonable about that.
Jan-Peter, whenever you mention any other country, however narrow and specific, you are always guaranteed to be told something irrelevant and unrelated about the same country. They have a pretty good deal with Brussels, right? They are in the free market, covered by free movement of goods and services and capital, but they're not in the common agricultural policy, not in the common fisheries policy. They pay a token amount to the budget, and they can trade further afield.
Still, let's have a look at what's happening at this moment. Angela Merkel says, well, maybe we should recognize that not everyone, some member states do not want a greater European integration. Let's have, is what she said, a two-speed Europe. So isn't that what's going to happen? You're protesting, you're saying we should get out. The English people, the British people, will say, no, we won't do that, it's too uncertain, that's too scary. And in the end, the UK will stay inside. Everybody happy.
I mean, if I knew for certain what was going to happen, I'd be a millionaire, wouldn't I? I'd be able to predict all of it. I don't know how the referendum will go.
What I mean to say is, it seems a tough battle, but is it really a tough battle?
Look, I think when people understand that we are talking about leaving the political institutions of Brussels, putting behind the crony capitalism, the lobbying, the pushing aside of public opinion, but we're not talking about leaving the market. I think if we make that argument that we are for democracy and for freedom and for friendship and cooperation with old good allies in Europe, but we are not in favour of being run by unelected bureaucrats, I think we absolutely can win this. And I don't believe we are the only people with reservations about the EU. When you voted against a decade ago, I can remember my colleagues in the European Parliament. Well, first of all, they said you hadn't voted. I remember Jean-Claude Juncker saying, I do not believe that the people of the Netherlands have voted to reject the European Constitution, which, that was his take on reality. But then the next thing that everybody said was, how could there have been such a change in public opinion in the founder member country, one of the original 6, such a pro-European country? Now, how do we know how a referendum would have gone 10 years before that or 10 years before that? It was the first time anybody had ever bothered to ask the people. And what we found is that in this country, as in my country, and as in France, and as in Ireland, and Sweden, and Denmark, and every other country in Europe, there is a gap between what the general population wants and what the bankers and diplomats and big businesses and mega corporations want. And by and large, I would trust the people. They have got a better record of getting this right than the corporate affairs guys.
Frans Timmermans, he said there's a Dutch bias. We think about the British that they are quite like us. I mean, they only drive on the other side of the road. That's a big difference. But it isn't true. There is a reservation. There's something about the British people that makes them be reserved. Why is this dislike from you against Europe? Where does it stem from?
I don't accept the basis of that question. I speak French, I speak Spanish, I've lived and worked all over
it isn't
the continent.
The island people against the continent?
My problem is not with Europe. No. My problem is with the Brussels bureaucracy that swats aside referendums when it doesn't like them, that rules in the interests of big lobbyists and big corporations rather than ordinary people, and that has inflicted through the euro an unnecessary recession on the continent that has condemned millions of people around Europe to poverty and emigration because they won't admit that they got it wrong on the single currency.
It's not the British spirit.
It's a democratic spirit, and you guys have it too. Unless I've totally misunderstood the Dutch people, you guys have just as much attachment to parliamentary freedom, to the rule of law and to democracy as any other people, as we have, or anyone else in Europe. This is not about Britain against Europe. This is about democracy against the technocracy in Brussels.
We'll see what David Cameron comes home with.
Thank
you very much, Mr. Hannan. Dan Hannan aan het eind van Buitenhof deze sombere zondag. Toch nog een hele prettige dag en tot ziens. Thank you very much.